when you were doing the book on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, what was the most surprising fact you found out about her? Or what was the most surprising thing you learned about her life?
Well, probably the most surprising fact, and I think I might surprise a lot of people here, is that she was opposed to the court's decision in Roe v. Wade. Does that surprise anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and she turned out to be right. So she was entirely in favor of a woman's right to choose, but she felt that the court made a few mistakes with that decision. And they made some legal mistakes, and they did things in the way that she didn't approve. And she actually had her own case, abortion case, working its way through the courts. And she sort of always regretted that her case hadn't come first, because she thinks that she should have done a better job. So what she thinks went wrong with Roe v. Wade, a few things. One is that the court, the rationale was a right to privacy. And the problem with that is there's nothing in the Constitution about privacy. She would have preferred for the decision to be found under the Equal Protection Clause. She did not like all that stuff in there about the woman and her doctor, because she thought it was sort of patronizing. But the main thing that she said was really where she predicted the future, because the decision was too broad. So the case that came to the Supreme Court was a Texas law that criminalized a doctor who performed an abortion. And what she thought should have happened is what we call a narrow ruling, that the court just says this Texas ruling is over the bounds, strike out the parts that are too much, we can't be criminalizing this, and send it back. Because all over the country, states were decriminalizing abortion and making it more available. And instead of doing a narrow ruling, which she approved of, the court said under the Constitution, a woman has an absolute right. And in one fell swoop, 46 states, they were out of compliance with the Constitution, created havoc. And what she predicted was a backlash. She said this was too big, it was too fast, and it's going to politicize abortion. And so she predicted a storm center. She predicted the far right wing mobilizing against this decision. And I think we are still on that backlash. So.
Absolutely, that's fascinating. What was the other thing? You said there were two things.
Okay, two things. Well, I don't know, maybe I was surprised, and appropriate for, I think, this festival, is how much her Jewish identity factored into her development as a lawyer and as a judge. And she talks about it a lot. When she arrived in law school, she said, she tells the story, when she arrived in law school and she was confronted with the Socratic method, which is when the professor asks a lot of questions instead of giving answers, and this close reading of text, like what is the meaning of is, or whatever, the lawyers are busy contemplating with the text. And she got to law school and said, well, this is just like Talmudic study. It reminded her of her Jewish education. And so she felt very, very comfortable in the practice of law. Actually, I think of two other quick mentions. When she was in her Supreme Court in the confirmation hearings, Senator Kennedy asked her about how sensitive she could be to racial issues. And she talked about being Jewish growing up in World War II, and how seeing those no dogs or Jews allowed signs sensitized her to marginalized groups. And also right in her chambers, the third thing I can think of, in her chambers, she has hanging on a wall a gift from a girls' Jewish school in Brooklyn. And in beautiful Hebrew letters, translates from Deuteronomy, justice, justice shall you pursue. And so she...
Great, that's awesome. Can you tell me also, before we get into the film, and by the way, thank you all again so much for being a part of the festival and coming and supporting us. I hope you join us for the rest of the weekend. Please let folks know there are tickets available. Just get that little last plug in there. What do you think her legacy will ultimately be?
Well, we think of her, most people, especially younger people, I think of her as a Supreme Court justice. But if she hadn't been appointed to the court, I think she'd be in all the history books as the activist lawyer who really changed the law regarding women. She brought equality under the law. So I think that would be
The legacy that will live on and on.
I think so.
And then I guess finally, in regards to the subject matter in tonight's film, Any things you want to mention or note?
Well, I'll say one thing. I haven't seen the film. I tried, but the closest was like 150 miles.
Right.
So I haven't seen the film. But I think I just want to emphasize the task, how hard the task was that she was up against. She was out to change the law, and what made this particularly difficult was there were Supreme Court rulings against her. And so it's very hard to get the Supreme Court to overrule itself, and it happens very rarely. And the reason is because of the idea of precedent, which is that when the Supreme Court makes a rule, then that becomes rule of law for other courts to follow later. And the Supreme Court's even said that it's better for something to be settled and settled correctly, because you can't keep changing everything every time there's a new judge. They have to continue following. And I did have a few sentences. Just want to read one or two sentences.
Is this from your book?
Well, it's not from my, it's a Supreme Court decision, so I can't claim any authorship. This is, but I did have it conveniently here. So the Supreme Court, just 3 sentences to tell you what she was up against when she came into her task. This is from a Supreme Court decision. Man is, or should be, woman's protector and defender. The natural and proper timidity and delicacy, which belongs to the female sex, evidently unfits it for many occupations of civil life. And one more. The paramount destiny and mission of woman are to fulfill the noble and benign offices of wife and mother. So that's what she was up against, and she had to get the Supreme Court to actually overrule itself. Not even.
Really remarkable. Teri, I want to thank you so much for coming. You really